I'm thrilled to introduce Ann Leary, who is the New York Times bestselling author of the novel The Good House, and 2 previous books, the memoir An Innocent Abroad, and a novel, Outtakes from a Marriage. Her work has been translated into 18 languages, and she has written short fiction and essays for the New York Times, Plowshares, National Public Radio, Red Book, among others. The Good House was called one of the best works of Massachusetts fiction in recent memory by Boston Magazine, and is in development for a feature film starring Robert De Niro and Meryl Streep. When Ann is not writing, she competes in equestrian sports and is a volunteer EMT. She and her husband Dennis share their small farm in northwestern Connecticut with 4 dogs, 2.5 horses?
Yes. Yes.
And the cat died, so I can't mention the cat anymore. Please join me in welcoming Ann Leary.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, I have one horse is a miniature. It's like not really. It's dog-sized horse. Thank you all for coming out on such a beautiful night. This is a really amazing turnout. Just raise your hand if you can't hear me. I'm a little nervous about that, and I'll try not to talk too fast. But this is an amazing turnout. Often in summer, people like to go home and barbecue in the evenings and not come to library events. I'm really flattered that you all came, and I often do a short talk, and then I've found I've been doing a lot of these events that maybe my talk is too short because I open it up for questions after like 5 minutes, and people kind of say, well, and I'll say, does anyone have questions? And they're like, we don't know anything about you. So driving here, I think I'll answer the questions that most people ask at these events. So what people usually ask often recently is The Good House still going to be made into a movie? And it is. It takes a long time. In the time between the time it was optioned and today, I've written a whole other book and had it published, and they're still fine-tuning the script. But that happens a lot in the entertainment business. That's why I write books. It's like I get to control how fast or slow things happen. I try to control it. My new book is called The Children. It is set in a town in northwestern Connecticut. It is a novel. It's not real, but it's. I drew from the area where I live a little bit. It's set on a lake in a town with a boarding school, and it's about a family, a blended family. I grew up in the 70s, and myself and many of my friends were part of this kind of, generation where all our parents got divorced. It was like this kind of mass uncoupling that happened in the 70s. And I actually just found out why everyone got divorced in the 70s. I found this out about 2 weeks ago. Apparently that's when the no-fault divorce laws changed. I didn't know this. But you used to have a reason, such as adultery or cruel and unusual punishment. And apparently sometime in the 70s, and I think it varied by state, but many states suddenly said, you really don't have to have a reason other than you don't want to be married to each other, and everybody split up. And so my friends and I had divorced parents and many of our parents remarried, and we grew up with step-siblings. And what often happens in blended families, as I'm sure many of you know, the children tend to live with the mother, and if she marries a man, often they live in the man's house, and his own children visit on weekends and holidays. So that's kind of the setup for this book. This book is the family in this book is an old Connecticut, old blue blood WASP family. I'm kind of fascinated by by WASP culture and New England Yankees. I moved to Massachusetts, to Marblehead, Massachusetts, when I was 14, from Racine, Wisconsin, and before that had lived in the Midwest and had moved about 14 times. So I moved all the time, and always in these kind of not very historic towns. They were more industrial areas. And then I moved to this incredibly historic town, rich in history and pirates and witchcraft and all sorts of stuff. But mostly in 8th grade, I was fascinated by the fact that many of my classmates grew up in that town, and so did their parents and their grandparents, and many of them had like beaches and coves named after their families. And I was really, really, I really envied that kind of sense of belonging that I felt you must have if you're a true townie in New England. And I know now that you don't feel necessarily like you belong, even if you come from a place. But then I thought that, that was my problem. I was, an outsider. People ask often at these events why, when I started becoming interested in writing. I did read a lot growing up because we moved so much. We often moved in the summer because my mother didn't want us to come in the middle of a school year, but the problem was you make your friends in school, so you go in the summer. And so my brother and I were really big, and my sister to a certain extent, but my brother and I were really big readers. And I always read, as a child, books about animals because I'm an animal nut. And I think the first time I read a serious book was I probably read The Red Pony and then became interested in Steinbeck. And I do remember reading The Grapes of Wrath at a really young age. And I only know I was young because I remember that it was a very big book, and I remember carrying it around and getting a lot of attention from the grown-ups. I think I carried it around after I was done with it. But I often tell people with children that Steinbeck is a really good writer for children who are moving into chapter books, because Steinbeck is really accessible to children. The language he uses is easy and is easy for them to understand, and it's so vivid and interesting. And I think The Grapes of Wrath, for me, I remember reading it, and it was the first time, instead of just reading a book and just like wanting the story, I actually noticed the structure of it, which is a very simple structure, but at the time it seemed really it seemed quite complicated, yet I understood. I was able to decode it, which was simply that. And if you've read the book, the first chapter is kind of this broad, focused, omniscient view of America in the Dust Bowl in the Depression. And then the second chapter, it narrows in on the Joad family. And then the next chapter, it pulls back again. And I remember reading this and being fascinated by that. I think that was the first time I was quite fascinated by the way the way a writer works, and wanting to figure out maybe if I could do that someday. And so I studied writing in college, and my first book was An Innocent Abroad. It was a memoir about my son being born very premature in London on what was supposed to be a weekend, and ended up being 6 months there. What else? I will read you a couple of pages. I don't like when people read too long when I go to author events, because I feel either I'm going to buy the book or not. I think it's boring. So I always prepare people. I won't read very long, but I want to read the first couple pages, because then I'll tell you how I came to write these, I promise, couple of pages, no longer. Okay. Everyone can hear okay? I'm not talking too fast? Okay. One August morning in 1956, Whit Whitman sat down to a breakfast of soft-boiled eggs and toast with his grandmother Trudy. They dined outdoors on the wide front porch of Lakeside Cottage. Whit's father had an early golf game that morning. His mother and sister had gone for a sail on the lake. Although he was only 8 at the time, Whit would always remember what he and his grandmother talked about during their breakfast. First, Trudy had described her displeasure at finding the family cat on her bed when she awoke. She had thought it was her sweater and was alarmed when it sprang from her hands. Then they had discussed the weather. "Isn't it cold for August?" Trudy asked. "Not really," said Whit. He wanted to go sailing and was bitter about having been left behind to look after his grandmother. "Won't you and your father want to plant bulbs this afternoon, or is it too soon for bulbs? Didn't we just plant the tomatoes?" Whit answered in a dull monotone. It was a bit soon for the bulbs. The tomatoes had been planted in May. "Oh, didn't we have the loveliest tomatoes last night?" Trudy asked. "Yes, Gran." "Weren't they perfectly ripe, dear?" "Yes, they were." "The roses, have they been cut back?" "I don't know, Gran," Whit said, squinting out at the lake in search of his mother's boat. And here's the point in the story where I always see the two white birches, gone now, against a flat blue sky, and the lake spread all around them like a pool of shimmering silver. "It's too soon to cut them back. They're still blooming," Trudy scolded, as if it had been Whit who had suggested cutting the roses back in the first place. "Would you like to walk down to the garden, Gran?" Whit asked. "No, dear, thank you," Trudy said, "but if you'll excuse me, I think I'll just go upstairs and die now." "Gran, not die," Whit corrected her. "You mean lie, not die." But Trudy had meant die. She walked up the back stairs to her bedroom. She used the servants' staircase behind the kitchen because she found the carpeted front stairs harder to manage. Then she folded back the quilt on her bed, pressed herself against the cool sheets, and died. It was her time. She was 89 years old, Whit would explain years later, his eyes sparkling and sometimes streaming with tears in the telling. Whit was unable to laugh properly without crying. Still, it was the way she did it. So polite. Well, she was a Farmington girl after all. One doesn't just die. Whit was my stepfather. My sister Sally and I grew up in his house, and we often begged him to repeat this story to us when we were little girls, usually interrupting him with demands for details. "Did you really try to wear the cat? Was her body stiff when you found it? Did it smell?" Trudy Whitman wasn't the first to die at Lakeside. Her mother-in-law, Ruth, died here 20 years prior. According to family legend, Ruth had spent much of her 93rd summer in bed because she had some kind of heart problem. One night, a rabid raccoon ate its way through the window screen and leaped on her bed, snarling and spitting blood-tinged foam everywhere. So old Ruth Whitman beat it to death with her book. Ruth didn't contract rabies from the animal, but instead enjoyed several weeks of renewed vigor, dressing each evening for dinner with very little help from the maid. One night, after tasting her dessert, she said, "That German cook has finally stopped using too much sugar in the rhubarb. It's quite good." Then she astonished her family by appearing to forego utensils and eat her pie from the plate like a dog. In fact, her heart had stopped, she had died, and that's just where her face had come to rest, there in the German cook's rhubarb pie. Whit loved telling family stories, their general theme being that Whitmans are gritty and combative, they live long, and then die when they're good and ready and not a moment sooner. So it must have come to a shock to him to learn that he had cancer at age 65, though it was anybody's guess how he reacted as he kept the diagnosis to himself until just a few months before he died. Then he told only our mother, Joan, who neglected to inform any of us kids until after he was gone. "It's what Whit wanted," she had said at the time. It seems that he didn't think he was going to die as soon as he did. Perhaps he thought the rules of cell division, malignancies, and whatnot, like so many other boring rules, simply didn't apply to him. Maybe he thought he could opt out of the whole cancer scheme that his doctor had laid out before him. In any case, he did die less than a year after his diagnosis, leaving Lakeside in a sort of limbo. So that is the first couple pages of my book. And the way it is, first of all, the other night I was at an event, and the person who interviewed me said, 3 people die in the first 3 pages of your book, which I didn't know until she said that. It never occurred to me that that happened. It made it sound like it's the Game of Thrones or something. Those 2 stories about the old ladies dying were true stories. The first one I heard, I was with a good friend at a local place called the Hidden Valley Eatery having breakfast, and a man we both knew was sitting next to us, kind of an old Yankee, preppy guy we both know and like very much. And we were talking about somebody else in our community who had recently passed away. And he said, "You know, I like the way my grandmother did it." And he told this story. His grandmother had actually said to her grandchildren one morning, "You know, I think I'll just go upstairs and die now." And she went upstairs and died. And so I was working on this book, and I said, I'm using that. I have to use that. It's perfect. It actually fit really well in with this family. And with this type of woman that I really love, which is this kind of tough old bird that you find in New England. Maybe you do the rest of the country, but I know a number of them here, and I quite like them. The second story was soon after we moved here to Connecticut, almost 20 years ago now. I read, it was like in the Lakeville Journal or something. It was a really small story. I think it should have been on the front page of the New York Times because I love stories like this. But a woman in her 90s was in her bed in Connecticut, and a rabid raccoon ate its way through her screen, and she beat it to death with a book. I remember, and it was just like this small item, and I was like, no, I need more. Like, what book? What book was it? Was it the good book, or was it a Bible, or was it, because I had read about men, trying to kill rabid things with like axes and not being able to, and this woman had just, finished up. Yeah, maybe it was the grapes of wrath. It might have been. So that's just an example of how, if you have your ear to the ground, which I always do, I am a nosy person. It's one of, I think, being a writer, and especially, I really do like to write fiction. I don't think I'll write another book of nonfiction in my life. I do like, one of the things I like about being a fiction writer is I get an excuse for some of the character traits that some might consider flaws, such as being really nosy and wanting to know everybody's business. And then also, I'm not like a terrible gossip. I will, if you tell me not to tell somebody, I will not usually, but I do like to repeat a good story, and often I like to embellish it up a little bit, make it a little better, and I get called out on that sometimes, and then I say, oh, that's what I do. Like, I write fiction, like I like to fiction it up a little bit. So, and I was at an event, I just came back from the Nantucket Book Festival, which was so much fun because I got to go to a lot of other author events, and somebody started her talk by saying, I get to lie for a living. I thought that was great. But I feel in writing fiction, I actually can be more honest than I was able to be in my memoir. My memoir, all my parents are still alive. People, that were I was writing about, were going to read it, so I had to be careful. I know not everyone is, and even though I was careful, people still had their feelings hurt, and there were people I left out trying to protect their privacy, and they were mad to be left out. Other people were furious that I had put them in. So then, with novels, you can actually really, really be honest about a character and in a way that you can't with, I wasn't able to with my memoir. And though none of my characters are based on any actual person, my favorite characters are usually composites of people I've known quite well. And so anyway, just a few more words about this book. It's, as I said, set on a lake, a picturesque lake in Connecticut. It's narrated, it's told by a 29-year-old named Charlotte, who grew up in this house. It's her stepfather's house. It's her stepfather, and he's died. Charlotte is, though she is 29, she might be called an agoraphobic, but she would deny that she has any problem. She's just a homebody, and she would probably call herself an introvert, but she actually hasn't left her mother's house in a couple of years. Because of the internet and the society we live in now, nobody really has noticed that they haven't seen Charlotte, because she sees everybody on Facebook, as we all do. And I actually live in the woods and I kind of tend to be by myself a lot, and people don't notice that they haven't seen me in a very long time. So that kind of informed that character for me. But another thing about Charlotte is she has a secret life on the internet. She has a very famous mommy blog, and I don't know if anyone in the audience is young or follows mommy blogs, but there's a few that are very, very famous, and they have millions of followers. And Charlotte has one of these, and she has, because of its popularity, she has diaper companies that are sponsoring her. She makes a lot of money, but she isn't a mommy. She has no children and has no husband. It's all made up, and although she'll tell I don't know if people have read The Good House, which was told from the point of view of an alcoholic, a person who might be an alcoholic, who might be in denial. But like Hildy in that book, she will tell you Charlotte tells you she's about herself, but then my challenge as a writer was to have the reader start to wonder how much of what Charlotte's saying about herself is accurate, because I think all of us are not the best. I often get asked, why do you write such unreliable narrators? But I think we all are unreliable when it comes to our telling about ourselves. we project who we want to be, and often are more reliable when we talk about others. So anyway, with that, does anybody have any questions for me? Was that too short?
I have a question.
Yes.
You in the Good House, you named the cat that saves Jake.
Yeah.
Is named Sneakers.
Yeah.
You had a cat, Sneakers.
Yeah.
Is that right? Was Sneakers, your cat, the inspiration for Jake's saving cat in the novel?
You know what's so funny about that is I'm not even a cat person, but I had a great cat named Sneakers. Sneakers is no longer with us, but I'm a like dog and horse nut. But I've never put any of my real dogs or horses in any book, and I don't really write about a lot. Although there's a dog trainer and dogs in this book, but it's not a main part of the story. But Sneakers was in that book, and yes, and had so yes, he inspired that. I love.
Did he have the big paws, and was he a stray? And
He was a big orange cat, and the thing about my Sneakers, and the reason I think why he was dear to me, he was a barn cat, and I know that's very, like, people don't, it's very controversial, but he was allowed to hunt, and he had a great life for 15 years, and but anyway, he wasn't kept in the house, but he, so he would come, I would go in the morning to feed the horses, and he would come and greet me, and exactly like this. He'd rub up against my legs once and go like purring, twice, and if I didn't run as fast as I could and like whip open a can of cat food, he would dig his claws into my calves, take his mouth and like shred. I have scars, just like start like savaging my leg. And so he trained me to, by the first time he did that, I went running like a clicker train. Like I ran and got his food and put it there, and he was just not. He was just like a really funny cat. He loved the horses. He had a really, really good relationship with one of my horses. They were kind of besties. But my husband plays hockey at our house. We have like a backyard rink. One of the guys, this cat was mean, and one of the guys went in because they needed water, and the hose ran into the barn, and nobody warned him, so I wasn't there, but I heard he ran in, and he had gear on, so he had like shin guards, and he came running out screaming, and the cat was attached to his like gear, just like, hissing and like going nuts, but he was a great cat. He never really didn't. Sometimes we brought him in the house to see, if he'd like to be in the house, and he was kind of like, whoa, like awkward, don't know what I'm supposed to do, and so.
Was he named Sneakers because of the paws?
No, it's just my kids were really little when I got him, so they thought that was a cool cat
That's
name.
almost like kismet.
Yeah.
He had these enormous paws, and he was named Sneakers.
Well, the thing about the paws is when I wrote The Good House, because I'm from Marblehead, it's right next to Salem, and there was a theme in The Good House where the main character had an ancestor who is a witch. If you have spent any time on the North Shore of Massachusetts, you will meet many, many, many people who claim that their ancestor was one of the witches hanged in Salem. I think there were 19 witches hanged, and you never meet, there's thousands of people, and they were hanged, so I don't know how they had descendants, but maybe they had children before they were hanged. But you never meet one of the accuser's children, you never meet, like, my great-great-great-grandfather was judge, so-and-so, or parish, the priest, so that's a funny thing. But anyway, I've just always been fascinated, obviously, because of living so close to Salem with the witch trials, and so I read a lot about witches and what people believed about animals. Oh, also in that book, she called her cats her dogs were her familiars, which I love. That that was a thing with witches, that they could send their spirit out in animals. And so, but anyway, there were a lot of cats in Massachusetts with double paws, and there was some kind of magic or black magic associated with them, and I can't remember, but I remember thinking, oh, great, because my cat has that thing, and there was something, that anything then that was extraordinary or freakish or something was considered, maybe demonic. And so I'll just share that we had a thing the other day. So I was out of town, I was in Boston. My daughter came up from the city to dog sit, we had kind of a witch day. She came up and said, I hated growing up here, and I'm never coming back. So first of all, our neighbor called and said, do you have pigs now? And called me like on my cell phone, and I said, no. And she said, oh, okay, because there's a dog and a pig walking up our driveway, and now they're heading up to Julia's house. And then I thought, because there were stories about some of the stories, witnesses of the witchcraft in Salem. One of them was that a woman who was considered a witch, her pig started walking, I don't know why, I love this, but they started walking like on two legs, walking around. And so somehow this pig and dog walking up towards my house seemed very kind of witchy. And so I called my daughter and said, so there's a pig and a dog, and they might be walking up the driveway. And then I was driving to a wedding that evening, and my daughter called hysterical because she and her boyfriend had gone down to our pond and decided to go fishing, and our dog came running out of the woods. A raccoon was behind it. A skunk was behind it, had already sprayed it. And so she was running to open the gate for the skunk. The skunk came after my daughter, chased all the dogs and my daughter and her boyfriend onto the porch, and then tried to come in through the dog door because it was rabid. I mean, this happened 2 weeks ago. And we presume it was rabid. So she was calling me. We called the people we know who hunt. Finally, a police officer came, shot it with his pistol, and said, and he's new to our town and came from New Haven, so he was like, he loved that he got to go back to his wife and say, guess what happened today? in deepest, darkest Roxbury, I shot a skunk. But anyway, I don't even know how I got onto that side. But yes, we had a cat named Sneakers. No longer. He had big paws, and he had a big personality, and trained me very well.
That's a great answer. I love the embellishment.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, I lied about the whole thing. He's just a little cat. Yes.
Often when you read fiction today, I like to read the acknowledgments, and it seems so many authors are thinking like an army of people. Any observations?
You know what? I'm so glad you said that, because this book, I did not do that. Because what happens is when you write your first book.
Excuse me, we can't hear
Oh, I'll repeat I was told to repeat the question, and then I forgot to do it. So he said, and this is true, often when you read novels, there's an acknowledgement section, and it's really long. It's actually longer than the books. It's like they thank every person they've ever met. And I actually have done that. I think when I first, it's such a big deal. Like, besides having my 2 children, when I got the call that said, we want to publish this book, I can't even tell you how hard I cried. It was so exciting. And so, of course, you imagine, years of writing and wanting to be published, you imagine, if I'm ever published, my acknowledgments page. But then it gets, again, like anything else, ridiculous. And also, you can't name everyone, and then the people you don't name, their feelings are hurt. So this time I actually named only the agent, the people who work in the publishing company, and my mother and my sister, and then, and then I almost felt like I had to call the other people that, but anyway, you're right. It is, but I think I do get it, and often I think if you look, you'll find that authors who have published a lot of books have the shortest acknowledgments, and then a debut author will often have a large one. But I find that's kind of sweet. Like, I'm happy for them that they have.
And follow up to that, do you have readers that you use before it gets to your editor?
I do have 2 good friends who are writers, and right now I'm working on a book, and one of the other friends we're both writing a novel, and so I've shared with her the book I'm working on, and she's shared with me, but I usually don't even show my husband a draft until I'm pretty comfortable with it, because to be perfectly frank, most people aren't going to read, except an editor who's getting paid multiple, they're going to read it once, and then they're going to, then when you say, oh, it's better now, they're going to go, not really. So, I kind of want it to be in good shape when I show it to people. And so, so I don't usually have people. I also find I've been rolling along in a book and decided to show it, and then hit a roadblock because of just like one word that a person said that threw me off. So I think, when things are working, I try not to show it. But I know other people who actually really, really do work well with feedback from other readers groups and stuff. Yes?
Well, and then have you thanked your mother and your sister? Did they inform the sister and the mother in the book? In this book,
Okay, so I thank the mother and the sister, but
you thank your mother and sister.
yeah,
In this book, there's the main character.
yes,
And she has a sister and a mother.
right.
Did your relationship with your sister and mother, was it reflected in this book?
You know what's funny? I would say yes and no. I actually wanted to thank both of them, but I really felt I should just thank. I knew my mother would be really touched if I just thanked her, and I can thank my sister any old time. But my mother and my sister, I'm very close with. We do have if you haven't read the book, the mother and there's two daughters and the mother, and there's a kind of a triangle. What do they call it in psychology? Like triangulation, where there's this kind of when any threesome, often with women, it's like what? Well, I thought we were. There's this thing that happens, and so I think in that. Yes, I drew on that for the characters in this book, but I'm really, really close to my sister. She's probably the closest person in my life, and this book is about. Two sisters and their relationship with their mother and their stepfather. It's a family book. What else? But yeah, it did inform them, and I acknowledged them both, but I actually dedicated the book to my mom, which. Okay, I'll just share this story. So my mother is, what I love about, and although she didn't grow up in New England, she's kind of, German and, proper and not the most emotional person, but I somehow thought, and we've had sometimes a fraught relationship. So I actually, when I wrote like the dedication, I was kind of like, oh my God, my mother's going to be so. And then when I got I kind of forgot I did it, and then I got the book and I saw it, and I ran it to the post office and overnighted it to my mother, and I wanted to surprise her. And so my sister was with her, and I literally was kind of crying. I was like, oh my God, when she opens it, she's going to all our years of thing will be healed, and she'll cry. So my sister sent me a text, and it's a picture of my mom, and so I said, what did she think? She said, oh, she thought that was very nice. She thought she was very honored. And I said, what else? And she's like, what do you mean? I said, did she get emotional? She's like, no, Ann, what are you talking about? She said, I said, I don't know if anyone saw this movie, The Lives of Others, but it's this German film that's great, and I won't do a spoiler, but I said, I thought it was going to be kind of like The Lives of Others, and she was like, she was like, oh, no. Wait. So anyway, but I think inside, she was crying really hard. I just realized this is on video. She really cried. She cared a lot. Go ahead.
What's your writing routine? Do you go for number of hours, number of words?
Okay, so everyone here, she asked what my writing routine is. That's also a common question. Thank you for asking it. I do have a routine, and I'm not a person who usually has routines, but I write every morning. I work best in the morning. I get up really early. I feed my animals. I used to drive the kids to school and then start writing, and now my kids are grown, so I just start writing. And I can't really write very well after noon or 1 o'clock. I get in the morning, I feel the most clear-headed, but also the most confident, and then my confidence kind of wanes. By early afternoon, I start becoming very critical, and then actually self-loathing. And so I'll write a piece, I'll write a scene in the morning that I will quite astonish myself. Oh my God, this is maybe, I might be writing a minor masterpiece. It might just change the world a little bit. And then the same passage I'll read 3 hours later while I'm eating a sandwich, and even if I'm by myself, my face will actually turn red with shame. I will read it and think, this is a 12-year-old's writing. This is I can't ever. And so I find that it's better to not even look at what I've written, much less try to write. Having said that, sometimes I do get on a roll with something and I can kind of write through. That doesn't happen that often. But I do, I talk sometimes to young writers, and I tell them, you have to actually sit down even if you don't feel like it's working. Because when I was young in college studying writing, I actually thought like I would wait for this muse to come and like strike me, and I would write brilliantly, and then it didn't. Then I would smoke a lot of pot and I do other things, and it's still, I think that. But anyway, I think that's an immature way of. I think a lot of people think that, and actually, you just have to write something, or nothing will ever get written. But I also have this thing I've found, and every book I've written, I haven't written that many books, but each book has taught me a lot about writing books. And I found this especially with this last book is I really like to leave it if it's working. Like if I'm writing in the morning and I'm like, oh, a scene is really working, I will sometimes then put it away because then I can't wait to get back to it. And that happened to me today. So even driving up here, it's like, okay, thinking about the scene, and can't wait till tomorrow. But if I write myself out and then I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen with the scene, or I don't know which scene what should be next, it's so hard to sit down to it the next day. It's so hard to get, it's hard. So I do find it's a good to leave it while it's working. Yes?
Do you still have the desk bed?
Yeah, do I have a desk bed? So I used to have a blog that I was I was an active blogger, and I haven't been actively blogged because I got very behind with the deadline of this book, and now I'm writing another book. But I do write in my bed. I know, it's kind of, but I write in my bed. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, I wear my pajamas up to the barn, and then I come back to my bed. But it's because I have lower back issues if I sit in a chair, so I kind of write like an otter, and then I eat there too. My bed is disgusting. It's like, yeah.
Okay, tell us about the next book.
My next book is. It's set in the 1920s, and it's a novel, but it's based on my grandmother and a very controversial institution that she worked for in the 1920s, which I'm not going to even start talking about, because when I do, then a lot of people want to ask questions, and I got yelled at from my publisher because you're only supposed to be talking about the book that is out. But through Ancestry.com and different things, I found out about this. I was trying to find out what happened with my grandmother. She was an orphan, and then she worked at this place. And the more I found out, the more fascinated I became. But I was writing this book, and when I sent in kind of the final, first final draft of this book, it was in December. And I literally sent it in on a Monday. On Tuesday, even though it was snowing, I got in my car and I drove to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and started researching the state archives. And I waited 2 years to start writing this. So this has been moving much better for me because it's actually based on true events. It's based on a real time in history, and I'm really loving that. I find it hard. The easiest thing for me is coming up with characters. Plot is harder because of history, what happened in the 1920s. There is a framework that's already in place, and I kind of know a little bit about what happened with my grandmother, and I know a lot about what happened with this institution. So I'm loving that I have that kind of the framework of a real historic event. So that's what I'm working on. Yes.
Can you talk to us about what your role is, if any, in the transition from The Good House as a book to a movie screen?
Oh, okay. So did everyone hear? So, did I have any role in the adaptation of The Good House to the movie? The producer who optioned it was Jane Rosenthal, who works for Tribeca Films, and that's Robert De Niro's company. And Film Nation came on. Those two companies are the producers. And Jane is from Providence, Rhode Island, so she's a real New England girl, and it was really important to her to really capture the character of Hildy, who's a real, New Englander. And so they had the fabulously talented Michael Cunningham, who wrote The Hours, wrote the screenplay, but now they're just, she wants it to be perfect. Immediately they announced that Robert De Niro and Meryl Streep were going to star in it, and then there was this window, because it turns out Meryl Streep is like a very famous actress that a lot of people want in their movies. And what was great, in answer to your question, yes, they did include me, and I got to actually sit in a meeting with Meryl Streep talking about my book and the character, which was really, really amazing. But she has a lot of projects in line, so now it's a matter of whether her schedule will work with the production schedule of this film. So. But yes, what happens when your book is optioned or adapted into a film, they don't have to show me anything, and they don't have to adhere to the book at all. There's no, I mean, they could write, it could be they could make it a musical, like, and they could never show me anything, and that happens sometimes, but these people have been wonderful. They really always wanted my input, so, and it was fun, and I got to take Michael Cunningham all over the North Shore and show him houses and stuff, so that was really fun, too.
Who's De Niro playing?
Frank. De Niro, Frank. So, if do people read The Good House? So Frank is this character who everybody in the town of Roxbury thinks is this guy who has a job similar to Frank's job. He's kind of a fix-it man, and physically might resemble Frank. But my sister, who lives in Marblehead, when she read the draft of the book, called me and she said, "I think you need to change some of the description of Frank because," and then she named this guy we went to high school with, who has that job now, who, the last I heard, he was a fisherman. Now he's the fix-it guy. And she said, everything, the ponytail, I said, I didn't know he looked like that now. I didn't know. It was not even supposed to be him. It wasn't supposed to be this other guy. But what I liked was that it was gratifying to know that two different towns thought they had a Frank. And then, I know, this is the best part of it. I did a talk, and it was in Florida, and a man, it was mostly women in the audience, and a man marched in and sat himself in the front row and frowned at me when I talked the whole time. And then I was like, does anyone have any questions? And he shot his hand up and he said, "I know Frank Getchell. I know who he is. He's based on Joe blah, blah, blah in some town in New Hampshire." And I said, I don't know who that is. But I said, what is gratifying is that any self-respecting New England town has a Frank Getchell. This confirms it. This guy drove all the way here, doesn't like author talks. He just wanted to make sure he knew who Frank was. So, anyway. Yes?
How do you feel when, an editor might ask you to change something that you really might object to or you love? Can you explain that process?
Yeah, so how does it feel when an editor wants you to change something? It actually, I've had 3 different editors on 4 books. I think 3 different editors. Yes, because this editor did 2 books. I've had great editors. So what happens when you get to the point where you actually have finished a book and the editor is looking at it, you really are desperate then. You want some, it's not perfect, and you want that kind of, I want somebody to tell me because I know it's not quite right, but I don't know exactly what's wrong. But when it comes to the kind of line editing where they start taking a sentence and saying, why don't you put this sentence here? There's always at the beginning, when I start working with an editor of this, wait, whoa, I don't think so. And then I'll do it, and it's with this editor and the other editors I've been blessed to work with, it's usually better. And once I do go through the first 2 chapters and find out that, then it becomes easy because I trust her then. And I do I tend to do what she wants, but having said that, I have removed portions of books that I've regretted later in every book, and so I think as I become more mature as a person and as a writer, I feel like I can stand my ground a little bit more, because before I was like, oh well, you're a professional. I don't know, Now I'm more wait a minute, no, this is important to the book, but anyway. So thank you for that question. Yes.
You were talking about that you're more comfortable with characters than with plot. Do you sketch out a plot in advance, or do your characters, as I've heard some writers say, kind of derail and create their own story?
That's a great question. So did everyone hear? Do I plot out and do I do it? Yes. Yes, I try. And I never stick to an outline. I outline, and the book is never anything like what I thought it was going to be. In The Good House, Hildy was a minor character. The book was supposed to be it was based on a real story I had read about a psychiatrist who had an affair with his patient. It was very scandalous, and he tried to kill himself. And Hildy was just a real estate broker in the town. And I was struggling with the book, and every time I was writing about Hildy, I loved writing it, and it actually came alive. And then I found that Hildy was it sounds so like, it sounds annoyingly, it sounds obnoxious somehow, but it really did happen that she kind of made herself the main character. Like I'm going to take this book over because this is like, it's not working. And as soon as I made her the narrator, it went because her voice, I knew her so well. And then what happens, and that is probably what you've heard other authors say, when you do, I think if you come to develop a character that you truly understand, then you understand any motives they might have and any actions. It really helps with the plot. It actually informs the plot in many ways. And often you'll be writing a scene and knowing how a character would act, it kind of informs the scene. So yes, I think that I've heard writers say they develop characters and then hope that they end up doing interesting things. So I try to do more. I try to have more of an idea of what the story will be, but I definitely feel that my novels have been more character-driven. Having said that, the one I'm working on now is there's so much story to it. I'm just keep going down these rabbit holes of research about the era, because I love who doesn't love the 20s? It's the 20s. So. Yes.
So do endings come at the end for you?
Yeah. Yeah, so she has to, endings come at the end. So the first book I wrote, my memoir, that was easy. What I found easy about that is it was a memoir. The plot, I knew it happened to me. I knew it happened at the end. I actually wrote the last chapter first, and then I wrote it, then I brought it to that. And that's actually an old screenwriting trick. You write the end, and then you bring it to the end. It actually works really well with a screenplay. But with my novels, none of the endings have been the ending that I thought they were going to be, and definitely not. This one has a very different ending than I had anticipated it having. Sorry?
What had you anticipated?
Well, I think it'd be a spoiler if I said that, but I suddenly one day thought, okay. When I realized what had to happen at the ending, it kind of was hard for me to end it the way I did, because I didn't want it to end that way. But I didn't think. But I think it's the way it was supposed to end. I don't know. Yeah, you can tell me. I have an email address on my website. You can tell me anything. Maybe it didn't need to end that way. I have heard criticism that it's great on Amazon and ungreat and Goodreads. Everybody's a critic, and so everyone can write what they think, and it is great because you do get immediate access, and it's very democratic. They don't have to be, they're readers, and so. But all writers pay attention, and I do think people have either loved or really, really didn't like the ending. It's no one's just okay with this book's ending. No. Yes.
In your reading, you read the story about the mother going upstairs and dying.
Right.
And that you'd heard that from someone else.
Right.
In a reading. How much flexibility do you have in your own writing to take a story like that and put it into your writing?
I actually told that man that day, like, I'm going to, I'm using that. I'm writing a book. And he doesn't even know that I write. So he's like, do whatever you do. I don't care. But my husband will sometimes. So my husband is in a television show that he writes, and I came home the other night and told him a really funny story that it had something funny that somebody had said to my friend. He said, seriously, like, are you using it? I'm using that. And I said, I'm not. You can have it. I don't need it. And then I actually emailed the person who said it, who told me about it. It had to do with a celebrity. And I said, tell me the story again. And it was even funnier when she told it this time. But yeah, so I think you can, I knew, so my friend who was having breakfast with me, I knew she'd get a kick out of it because she was there. Like, I think I sent her the pages when I wrote them and said, like, look what I did. And she was like, oh, whatever. But but anyway, yeah, I think it's okay. I mean, it's not. There's nothing. I probably wouldn't write a true thing that was embarrassing or scandalous about somebody, because you could get sued, I think. But I would never try to embarrass somebody. But this was a great story. He obviously had told it at many dinner parties, and it was a great, So I'll tell a story like that. But I would never tell. anything intimate that would happen in my family, even in a novel, because I wouldn't want a person to be. I want to be invited home for Thanksgiving. Also, I'll have to cook the dinner. Anybody else? Yes.
Are either of your children interested in writing?
They're both are either of our children interested in writing? So they're both interested in writing. My daughter works for The Daily Show, where she has worked for years, and she's got the best job in the world. She started as an intern, and now she's an associate producer. And she writes on the side. She and a friend they write. They're writing, well, I'm not even, she gets mad if I talk about it, but yes, she writes. And I got yelled at for talking about it. And my son works for my husband as a writer's assistant on his show. So yeah, they both are more interested in writing for television and film. And they have never read any of my books. But
Your son never.
no, he's mad. I wrote a book about him being born premature. It's that he felt it was a huge invasion of his privacy. He was, it really was. But I like to think I have this idea. I guess it's the idea of what my mother's reaction would be when she opened my book. But when I'm dead, I think they'll read my books, and then they'll fully understand me, and they will cry. So that's how I leave it with that. I have a very.
Does your husband read your books?
He does, and he's always. It's like having my husband read. He's the most supportive person. It's almost like when you're a kid, like showing your mom your drawing, and oh my God, it's so good. And that, but it's like it's sweet. But he really is like, oh my God, you wrote that. That's it's very sweet. He's very supportive. But again, having said that, I don't make him read draft after draft because he can only say it so many times. Okay. So yes.
If you get stuck in a scene or in a plot twist, do you use other people? Do you talk it out with other people, or do you keep it to yourself and beat your head against the desk?
Yeah, no, I never talk it out because it's really hard for me. If you talk about, it'll almost kill a scene if I try to talk. Usually if I tell a person what I'm writing about, they get this look like, and then it kills it. I'm not a good seller of stuff I'm writing. The question was, when I get stuck in a scene, do I talk it out? But I was thinking about this driving here. I do love to drive. Driving helps my writing a lot. I think through my writing a lot when I'm driving. For some reason, it helps me. And I often, when I'm stuck in a scene, will go to a book. And I think for any writers, it's really important to be readers. And there are certain books, I read a lot of new books, but there's a lot of books I read over and over again because I love them. But often it's because I quite am intrigued with the writing. Today I wrote a scene, but I felt there was something flat about it, and it involved a young woman experiencing shame. And immediately, when I got behind the wheel of the car, I remembered a scene in this small Edith Wharton book called Summer, and it's like the summertime version of Ethan Frome. It's this fabulous book. It's not, it's set in the same area, the Berkshires. Anyway, she in this scene described a woman who is feeling very ashamed, but being Edith Wharton, she never says the woman feels ashamed. She actually shows the woman's behavior, and that's what a great writer does. So I will go back. So driving here, I thought, I got to go back and read that. So I'll go back. I won't copy it word for word, plagiarize, but I think that if you read enough, I do have always think, oh yeah, who did that great? Who did that really well? And go back and study it. And even thinking about it made me think about how I would get this character to reveal this emotion, and it made me think about this actor. Often I think of acting because that's what my husband does, but and I'll end it with this because I won't go on. But I thought in acting, and many of you have probably heard this, the way to act drunk is to try to act sober, because that's what you do when you're drunk. You try to make everybody think you're sober, and in that way, so that makes the best portrayal of a drunk person. And I thought for this character in this scene, it's really important that because shame is so shameful. It's like so hard for people, and she needs to show, she has to act not ashamed, and that came to me as drove here. So I thank you for inviting me here. I wouldn't have worked that out. But I really do thank you all. You've been the best crowd. Author events can be so, like, you can have a huge crowd, and then the next night you have like 5 people. And I heard there were a number of people who had reserved seats, and I've had that happen, and then they put all these chairs out and like 10 people come. So it really is so, I'm just so humbled and honored that you all came, and you've been a really great group. So thank you for coming.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.